Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always up for a knowledge adventure.
Excellent. Today, we're tackling a topic that I think everyone can relate to, conflict resolution. But specifically in the workplace.
Oh, the ever-present workplace drama.
Exactly. But instead of gossiping, we're going academic. We've got this fascinating article by Professor Mujtaba and Professor Garner.
Yes. They really dig into the benefits of negotiation and mediation as compared to, well, the more formal stuff.
Right, like arbitration and going to court.
Yeah.
Full-blown legal battles.
Which, let's face it, nobody really wants.
Definitely not the ideal way to spend your time or resources. So this article really caught my eye because it's super practical.
It is. It's like a toolkit for anyone dealing with conflict, HR folks, managers, even lawyers who are specifically focused on this stuff.
And the authors jump right in, saying negotiation is something we do constantly. It's not just a work thing.
It's life, right? From deciding where to eat dinner to, negotiating a car purchase.
They even use the example of planning a family vacation.
Oh, yeah. Talk about a potential minefield.
Seriously. But the point is, by understanding the dynamics, we can approach these situations way more strategically.
And they emphasize this really crucial point. The difference between positions and interests.
Okay, break that down for me.
So your position is what you want, right? But your interest is the underlying why.
Interesting. So it's not just about arguing about what each person wants, it's about understanding the motivations behind it.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, they tell this story about two retail employees, Valerie and Kathy. They were always butting heads.
Classic workplace conflict.
Right. But it seemed like a personality clash at first.
But there was more to it.
Way more. Kathy was actually convinced Valerie was trying to get her fired.
Whoa, that's a bit intense. And imagine how that fear was coloring all their interactions.
Absolutely. Once they uncovered this hidden fear, they were able to address it head-on. Turns out, Valerie just wanted Kathy's guidance. Mentorship, not her job.
Wow. Talk about a miscommunication.
Yeah.
But by focusing on their interests, they flipped the script. Instead of a conflict, they ended up with a mentorship.
It's such a good example of how understanding the why can lead to solutions you wouldn't even expect.
It makes you think about all those times you've maybe gotten stuck in a conflict at work. Could things have gone differently?
It's a great question to ask yourself, really, because what this article is all about is shifting our perspective. Seeing conflict as a chance to solve problems, not just win.
Okay, so we've got negotiation as this key skill, especially at work. But let's be real, sometimes things get stuck. That's where mediation comes in, right?
Exactly. Mediation is about bringing in a neutral party, a mediator, to facilitate the conversation.
So it's not about someone dictating a solution, but helping the parties in conflict talk it out constructively.
Precisely. A good mediator doesn't take sides or impose their own opinion. It's more like they're helping to create a space for productive dialogue, helping people actually listen to each other.
Okay, I like that. It's almost like, I don't know, an orchestra conductor.
Yeah.
Helping different instruments harmonize, even if they're playing different tunes at first.
That's a great analogy. And the article points out a bunch of benefits to mediation, like cost-effectiveness, speed, and confidentiality, stuff that's really important, especially for businesses.
It makes sense. But isn't it tempting to just want someone to tell you what to do? Like just hand over the decision and be done with it.
It is, and the article actually talks about that. Sometimes people have a hard time with the autonomy mediation offers. They'd rather someone else made the tough calls.
I can see that. It's that balance, right? Wanting control, but also realizing that a solution everyone creates together might be more, well, sustainable.
And it highlights a really key difference between mediation and things like arbitration or going to court. In those cases, you're handing over that decision-making power to an arbitrator or a judge.
Which means you lose some control over the outcome.
Yeah. But with negotiation and mediation, the power stays with the people involved. They get to shape the process and come up with a solution that actually works for them.
It sounds like this article is really big on self-determination in conflict resolution. You're not just passively accepting something, you're actively creating it.
And that can be super empowering, especially in workplace situations, because sometimes people feel like their voices aren't heard.
Right, and that's why the authors framed this article for HR, managers, and legal teams, right? These are the folks constantly dealing with these tricky interpersonal situations. They need the tools.
Exactly. It's about giving them the skills and strategies to handle conflict effectively, to create a more harmonious work environment, basically.
This reminds me of something else. The article mentioned the role of an ombudsperson. What exactly is that?
Basically, it's someone within an organization who advocates for fairness and ethical practices. They offer this confidential, impartial space for employees to raise concerns and, get guidance on dealing with conflicts.
So it's like having an in-house mediator who's focused on making sure things are handled fairly and ethically.
You got it. And they're super important for fostering open communication and a healthy approach to resolving conflict within an organization. And it's interesting because while ombudspersons are all about promoting fairness and resolving conflicts, they're not quite the same as mediators.
Right, right. I mean, they both have that kind of peacemaker vibe, but I guess their roles are distinct.
Yeah, the ombudsperson is more like an internal watchdog, making sure the whole organization is operating ethically.
They're looking at the bigger picture, not just individual squabbles.
Exactly. Now, switching gears a bit, back to negotiation. This article really stresses the importance of preparation. Like, you wouldn't just wing an important presentation, would you?
Oh, absolutely not.
Oh.
But I'll admit, sometimes I'm guilty of winging it when it comes to, those tricky conversations. So what kind of prep work are we talking about here?
Well, first off, they talk about your BATNA. It stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. Basically, your walkaway point. What's your best option if the negotiation tanks?
Ah, okay. So knowing that gives you leverage.
Big time. And
Yeah.
confidence. Because you're not, desperate to make a deal at any cost.
Right, right. So for example, if I'm trying to negotiate a raise, my BATNA might be that job offer I got from another company, or even just knowing how much value I bring to my current role. It's like my safety net.
Exactly. The article also suggests trying to anticipate the other side's perspective. What are their interests? What might their BATNA be?
So it's not just about going in with my own goals, but actually putting myself in their shoes, trying to understand where they're coming from.
That's the key, because remember, it's not about winning or losing. It's about finding a solution that works for everybody.
Makes sense.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's the communication piece. Seems obvious, but I'm sure there's more to it than just, talking.
Oh, yeah. They really emphasize active listening.
Which, to be honest, I sometimes struggle with. I get so caught up in what I'm going to say next, I miss stuff.
Happens to the best of us. But the article gives some good tips. Pay attention to both verbal and nonverbal cues. What's their tone like? What's their body language telling you?
Right. It's not just the words, it's the whole package.
Exactly. And don't just listen to respond, listen to understand. Ask clarifying questions. Make sure you're both on the same page.
It's almost like a dance, isn't it? This back and forth of listening, responding, clarifying. You're gradually building towards a shared understanding.
Love that analogy. And when it is your turn to talk, keep it clear, concise, respectful, no jargon, no fancy lawyer speak. Just focus on expressing your needs and interests in a way the other person can easily grasp.
Okay, so preparation and communication. The power couple of successful negotiation.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And this advice, it's not just for lawyers and HR, It's for everyone.
Absolutely. This article is full of gems.
Speaking of which, there's this whole section on how culture impacts negotiations. Super relevant, especially with how globalized the workplace is these days.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Just because a certain approach works in one culture doesn't mean it'll fly somewhere else.
Right. And they highlight Professor Salakus's research on this. There's even a chart in the article, Figure 2, breaking down how different cultures approach key aspects of negotiation.
It's like a cheat sheet for understanding cultural nuances. For example, some cultures are super direct, like straight to the point. Others are more, subtle and collaborative. You got to know those differences, especially when you're dealing with people from different backgrounds.
Absolutely. The article warns against making assumptions or trying to force our own cultural norms on others. You got to be flexible, be sensitive.
And sometimes you might even need a skilled interpreter. If there's a language barrier, forget about it.
Yeah, communication breakdowns are a recipe for disaster in any negotiation. Oh, and speaking of breakdowns, sometimes things just get stuck.
Happens all the time. So what do you do when you've done your prep, you're communicating well, you're being culturally sensitive, but things are still at a standstill?
Well, the article mentions a few tactics that can be helpful. One is starting with a reasonable but ambitious opening offer.
So don't be afraid to aim high.
Within reason, of course. It gives you room to negotiate and shows the other side you're serious.
But what if their counteroffer is, ridiculously low? Do you just walk away?
Not necessarily. This is where knowing your BATNA comes in handy. You have that bottom line, that safety net. It gives you the confidence to either stand firm or propose something more reasonable.
It really is like a dance, finding that sweet spot where both sides feel like they got something valuable.
That's a great way to put it. Another tactic they mention is using objective criteria. Basically, using external benchmarks or standards to support your arguments. Like, if you're negotiating salary, you might research industry averages or compare your qualifications to people in similar roles.
Oh, smart. So it's about grounding the negotiation in facts, not just feelings.
Exactly. It makes your arguments stronger and helps move things towards a fair and logical outcome.
Love these tips. I'm feeling way more prepared for my next negotiation already.
Remember, practice makes perfect. The more you do it, the better you'll get.
Now, we've talked a lot about negotiation and mediation separately, but the article also brings up this idea of combining them. What was it called again?
Hybrid dispute resolution, or HDR. Basically, blending different approaches to create a more flexible process. Like, one example is MedArb, where the same person acts as both mediator and arbitrator.
Oh, right. So it's like having a built-in backup plan if the mediation doesn't work out.
Exactly. It can be super efficient, especially when time is tight.
But didn't we also talk about some potential downsides to this approach? Like, wouldn't people be hesitant to fully open up in mediation if they knew that same person might end up making the final decision?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. The article acknowledges that. You have to carefully weigh the pros and cons and make sure everyone's comfortable with the process.
So, MedArb might not be the best fit for every situation. What are some other examples of these HDR approaches?
Well, there's ArbMed, which is kind of the reverse. The arbitrator makes a decision first, but it's kept secret. Then the parties go to mediation.
Wait, really? Why would you go to mediation after the decision's already been made?
It seems counterintuitive, but it can actually be really effective. Because knowing the arbitrator's decision, even if it's confidential, can motivate people to work harder to find a solution they can all live with.
Oh, I see. It's like a little nudge, encouraging them to compromise and come to an agreement they're actually happy with, rather than just accepting something imposed on them.
Precisely. It shifts the focus away from winning or losing and back to finding a truly collaborative solution.
These hybrid approaches are fascinating. It's like taking the best tools from different conflict resolution toolboxes and customizing a process that fits the specific situation.
Exactly. That's the beauty of HDR. It recognizes that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to conflict.
And speaking of different approaches, I'm really curious about this whole online dispute resolution thing. ODR, right? Seems like it's becoming a bigger deal, especially with so many businesses operating online these days.
Oh, absolutely. ODR is huge, especially for cross-border disputes and things like e-commerce, intellectual property, you name it. It offers a way to resolve conflicts without having to go through the whole court rigmarole.
Which can be super expensive and time-consuming. But can you really build that same level of trust and rapport online? I mean, it's not like being face-to-face.
That's one of the big challenges with ODR. The article talks about that potential for impersonality. And then there's the whole cultural aspect. What might be considered appropriate communication in one culture could be totally off-putting in another.
Right, so you have to be extra careful with your words when you're communicating online, especially across cultures.
For sure. And it's not just about replicating the face-to-face experience online. It's about adapting to the unique challenges and opportunities of the digital world.
It's like a whole new frontier for conflict resolution.
And it's constantly evolving. As technology keeps advancing, we can expect to see even more innovative approaches to ODR. Things like, I don't know, maybe even incorporating AI or virtual reality to help people communicate better and find solutions.
Wow, that's some next level stuff.
Right.
But even with all the tech advancements, I think what this article really emphasizes is that at its core, conflict resolution is about human connection.
Totally agree. It's about understanding each other's perspectives, needs, and feelings, whether we're sitting across a table or interacting through a screen.
So we're back, diving deeper into the world of conflict resolution. And, before the break, we were talking about online dispute resolution, ODR. It's fascinating to think about how technology is shaping the way we handle conflict, especially with more and more interactions happening online.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, think about all the disputes that pop up online these days. E-commerce transactions gone wrong, intellectual property issues, even online harassment. ODR offers a way to address these conflicts without having to go through the whole court system, which can be, well, a bit of a nightmare.
Totally. I mean, courts can be slow, expensive, and not exactly user-friendly. But, it makes me wonder, can you really replicate that same level of, human connection and trust in a purely online setting?
That's a great question, and it's something the article talks about. There's definitely a risk of things feeling impersonal with ODR. And then, of course, you have the added layer of cultural differences, which can be even trickier to navigate in an online environment. What might be considered perfectly normal communication in one culture could be perceived as, like, totally rude or offensive in another.
Right, those nuances can get lost in translation, especially when you're relying on text or even video calls. Not quite the same as being in the same room with someone.
Exactly. So it's not just about taking the same conflict resolution processes we use offline and slapping them onto an online platform. It's about adapting those processes, really thinking about how to design platforms and communication protocols that foster understanding and bridge those cultural divides.
Makes sense. It sounds like ODR is this constantly evolving field, kind of like the Wild West of conflict resolution.
It is, and it's exciting to think about where it's headed. I mean, as technology advances, we might see even more creative approaches to ODR, maybe incorporating AI or virtual reality to enhance communication and make the whole process smoother.
Wow, AI mediators, now that's a thought. But even with all these tech advancements, I think what really stuck with me from this article is that at the end of the day, conflict resolution is about human connection.
Absolutely. It's about understanding each other's perspectives, needs, and feelings. That's the heart of it, whether we're sitting face to face or interacting through a screen.
So well said. And I think this deep dive has really given us a lot to think about, a whole toolkit of approaches for dealing with conflict effectively. Negotiation, mediation, arbitration, these hybrid options. It's amazing how many different paths there are.
It is. And the key takeaway for me is that conflict, well, it's just a natural part of life. It's not something to be afraid of or avoid. It's actually an opportunity, a chance to grow and deepen our understanding of ourselves and each other.
I love that perspective shift. Conflict as an opportunity, not a threat. It's like that saying, the only way to do great work is to love what you do. Maybe the only way to have truly great relationships is to embrace the conflicts that inevitably arise and see them as chances to connect on a deeper level.
That's beautifully put. And I think it's a powerful message to leave our listeners with.
For sure. So to everyone listening out there, remember, conflict happens, it's normal. But you have the power to choose how you respond. Be prepared, communicate clearly, listen actively, focus on finding solutions that work for everyone involved. And don't be afraid to try different approaches, whether it's direct negotiation, mediation, arbitration, or even those cool hybrid methods we talked about.
And if you're looking for more guidance, definitely check out the article by Professors Mujtaba and Garner. It's packed with practical advice for anyone dealing with conflict resolution, especially in the workplace.
We'll make sure to include a link to the article in the show notes, along with some other helpful resources like the Ombuds Association and the American Bar Association's Dispute Resolution section. There's a ton of support out there.
And remember, these skills, they're like muscles. The more you use them, the stronger they get. So go out there, practice, and keep those conversations flowing, those perspectives expanding, and turn those conflicts into opportunities for growth and connection.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep diving deep.